"If you sew this dress, I'll take you to the ball," mocked the prince, but she created a masterpiece. "Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from." The air inside the atelier was tense and alive, filled with the whisper of thread and the rhythm of needles tapping against fabric. Amélie Durand bent over her work table, her brown hair pulled into a modest knot, her hands moving with silent precision. The other seamstresses spoke in low voices, laughing now and then, but Amélie rarely joined them. Her stitches were her words, her silence was her armor. Around her, piles of silk and lace waited for the royal ball of Versailles, a celebration that would gather every noble name of France. Madame Delacour, the palace's chief dressmaker, swept into the room, the scent of her perfume arriving before her. "Ladies, focus," she commanded. "The Duchess of Montreuil expects her gown by tomorrow evening, and I do not intend to disappoint her grace." Her sharp gaze fell upon Amélie's work. "You, child, how far have you come with the embroidery?" "Nearly finished, madame," Amélie answered quietly. Madame Delacour inspected the fabric, lips pursed. "Your hand is steady, I'll grant you that," she muttered. "Perhaps too steady. You make the rest appear idle." A few of the other seamstresses exchanged glances, some admiring, others resentful. Amélie kept her eyes on her work. She had learned long ago that excellence invited envy as easily as praise. By midday, a page arrived, announcing that the prince himself would visit the atelier to inspect the progress of the gowns. The room fell into frantic motion, girls brushing lint from tables, hiding crooked seams, smoothing ribbons. Amélie simply folded her hands and waited. Moments later, Prince Louis de Valcourt entered with 2 courtiers and a languid smile that suggested boredom more than authority. He was tall, elegant, and very aware of both. "So these are the fairies of the court," he said lightly, glancing around. "The hands behind our splendor." His tone made it sound like a jest rather than gratitude. Madame Delacour curtsied. "Your Highness honors us. We are preparing the gowns for the Duchess Hélène as ordered." "The Duchess," he said, as though the name tasted dull on his tongue. His eyes wandered across the room until they stopped on Amélie. She had not looked up, though she felt his gaze like heat against her skin. "And who is that one? The quiet mouse in the corner?" "A helper, Your Highness," Madame Delacour replied quickly. "The daughter of one of the laundresses. She assists with smaller details, hemming, finishing touches." "A helper," he repeated, stepping closer. "She does not look like one." Amélie rose, curtsying politely. "Your Highness?" The prince studied her, his amusement deepening. "Tell me, what is your name?" "Amélie Durand." He tilted his head as though testing how the name sounded in his mouth. "Durand. A good, simple name. Tell me, Mademoiselle Durand, are you skilled with the needle?" "I have done my best to learn, sir." "Your best? That sounds humble. Tell me, could you sew the gown of a duchess?" Madame Delacour stiffened. "Your Highness, such work requires—" "I am not asking you, madame," he interrupted, eyes still fixed on Amélie. "Could you?" Amélie hesitated. She could feel every gaze upon her, waiting for her to falter. "If it pleases your Highness, I could try." The prince smiled. "Try. A dangerous word. I prefer promises." He turned to the courtiers, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "Let us amuse ourselves. This morning the Duchess's gown was delayed, was it not? Too many ruffles, too little inspiration." Laughter rippled through the group. He looked back at Amélie, eyes glinting with mischief. "Then here is my proposal. If you sew this gown before the sun sets, I shall take you to the ball tonight. Imagine it, the daughter of a laundress dancing beneath the chandeliers." The atelier went silent. Then, slowly, the laughter returned, sharper, crueler. One of the seamstresses covered her mouth to hide a giggle. Madame Delacour's expression was unreadable, caught between horror and fear. Amélie's throat tightened. She wanted to vanish, to melt into the floor. Yet she managed a curtsy. "If that is your Highness's wish." The prince raised an eyebrow, surprised by her composure. "Indeed it is. We shall see what you can do, Mademoiselle Durand. I expect the masterpiece ready by sunset." With a flick of his gloved hand, he turned and left, his courtiers trailing after him like shadows. The moment the door closed, the room erupted in whispers. "Did you hear him? Take her to the ball. She'll never finish by nightfall. What arrogance! as if he'd truly keep his word. Amélie stood motionless, her cheeks burned, her hands trembling. Madame Delacour approached her slowly. "You understand, child, that you have embarrassed His Highness with your silence. You should have refused." "I could not refuse a prince," Amélie murmured. "Then you will ruin yourself," Madame Delacour said, voice low. "Still, if you wish to attempt this folly, the fabrics are there." She gestured toward a chest filled with golden silk, the fabric intended for the Duchess's gown. The rest of the day blurred. Amélie spread the silk across her table, the weight of humiliation pressing upon her shoulders. Around her, the other girls whispered, but she no longer heard them. The challenge had become a wound she could not leave untended. She threaded her needle, breathing deeply. At first her hands shook too much to hold the cloth steady. She pricked her finger, a small drop of blood staining the pale fabric. She pressed it away with the corner of her apron and began again. Stitch by stitch the rhythm returned. Hours passed. The chatter faded as the others left for supper. Only Amélie remained, sewing in the dim light of a single candle. Each sound in the vast palace echoed, the creak of floors, the distant laughter of nobles, the faint music drifting from the ballroom where rehearsals had begun. In that solitude, memories stirred, her mother's voice, soft and patient, "Sew as though you are binding the pieces of your own soul." Her mother had mended the linens of the palace before illness took her. Amélie had inherited her thread and her pride, but nothing more. By late afternoon, exhaustion had turned her limbs to stone. She leaned back, staring at the growing gown. It was far from finished, yet something in its lines, in the way light played upon the silk, made her heart beat faster. She could see it, the vision that had lived in her hands long before this day. The door creaked open. Madame Delacour entered with a frown. "You are still here?" "Yes, madame." "Stubbornness is not virtue," the older woman snapped. "You have made some progress, I admit, but not enough. His Highness meant to humiliate you, not to crown you. You might save yourself the trouble." Amélie kept sewing. "I must finish it." "You'll ruin your eyes before you finish anything," Delacour muttered. Yet she watched the young woman's work a moment longer, unease flickering across her face. "Very well, work then, but if you fail, remember that I warned you." When the door closed again, Amélie whispered to herself, "If I fail with dignity." The clock struck 6. The sun outside began to sink, throwing long stripes of gold across the floor. Her fingers trembled from fatigue, but she pushed through it. Around her, silence thickened. The palace itself seemed to sleep while she labored. At one point, a shadow crossed the doorway. She looked up and froze. Prince Louis stood there alone, his expression unreadable. "So it was not a jest to you," he said softly. She rose, startled. "Your Highness." He stepped inside, glancing at the unfinished gown. "I expected to find you gone. Instead, I find this." "I gave my word," she said. He smiled faintly. "A servant who keeps her word better than most noblemen. Remarkable." Amélie looked away. "Your Highness was mocking me." "Perhaps," he admitted. "But now I am curious." His gaze lingered on the silk. "Do you truly believe you can finish before nightfall?" "I must try." He leaned closer, voice low. "And if you succeed, then your Highness will keep his word." Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe, or something deeper. He straightened. "Very well. I shall expect my dance partner tonight, then." When he left, her knees nearly gave way. She sank back onto her stool, her heart hammering. What had begun as humiliation was now a test she could not afford to lose. As the last light faded from the windows, she relit her candle and worked faster. The room grew warm, her breath shallow. Every stitch felt like a battle against time. Outside, laughter and music drifted faintly from the grand hall. Twice she nearly dropped her needle. Once she pricked her hand again and hissed in pain, yet she refused to stop. Her hands knew the pattern by heart. Her mind no longer questioned, only followed the rhythm of creation. By the time the final rays of dusk disappeared, she had completed the bodice, the skirt, the delicate lace at the hem. Only the embroidery across the chest remained. She bent forward, eyes heavy, forcing herself to finish. The door opened again. One of the younger seamstresses peeked in. "Amélie, are you still working?" "Yes," the girl hesitated. "The others said you've gone mad." "Perhaps I have." The girl shifted awkwardly, then smiled faintly. "I hope you finish." He shouldn't have mocked you. Amélie looked up. Why do you care? Because, the girl whispered, if you win, maybe the rest of us will believe we can too. She slipped away before Amélie could answer. Those words gave her new strength. She continued through the evening, her mind clear now. Each motion became part of something larger, a silent defiance against every sneer, every order barked without kindness. The candle burned low. She barely noticed when footsteps approached again. Madame Delacour's voice sounded sharp behind her. Enough! You will ruin the silk. Go to bed. Amélie did not look up. It will be finished. Delacour crossed her arms. You think this will change your place? You will still be a laundress's daughter tomorrow. Perhaps, Amélie said. But tomorrow, they will remember my work. Madame Delacour's eyes narrowed. Arrogance will destroy you. Amélie met her gaze for the first time. No, madame. Only fear destroys. For a heartbeat, the older woman looked startled, as if seeing her properly for the first time. She left without another word. The hours crept on. Outside, the bells of Versailles marked each passing hour with cold precision. 10 o'clock, 11, midnight. Amélie's candle guttered low. Her eyes stung, her shoulders ached, but still she worked. She thought of the ballroom above, of the polished mirrors reflecting endless light. The nobles would be arriving soon. The prince would be laughing, perhaps forgetting his cruel jest already. But she would not forget. The embroidery began to take form, delicate vines in gold and silver thread, curling like living branches across the fabric. Her hands bled, but she did not pause to clean them. The drops vanished into the shimmer of silk. The first bell of 1 o'clock rang faintly in the distance. The palace slept. Even the mice were silent. Amélie's breath came raggedly as she reached for another needle. The one she held had bent slightly from overuse. She tried to straighten it, pressing carefully against the table's edge. It snapped. The sharp sound echoed through the still room. She stared at the broken halves in disbelief. Her thread hung loose, trembling in the candlelight. She searched the drawers. Empty. She checked the work table, the floor, her apron pockets. Nothing. Every other needle had been taken by the others earlier that day. She stood in the silence, the half-finished gown before her, golden and still. Her hands began to shake. The night outside was deep and cold. For the first time she felt the weight of impossibility pressing upon her. From the corridor came the distant chime of another hour. She sank back into her chair, heart pounding, whispering to herself, "No, not now, please, not now." But the broken steel glinted cruelly in the light. There was no spare to be found. As the first bell of evening tolled, Amélie lifted her needle and whispered to herself, "Then I shall sew until the dawn." The candlelight trembled across the workshop as Amélie held the broken needle between her fingers. She turned it once, twice, as if hoping it might mend itself. The silence pressed upon her chest, heavier than the golden fabric before her. Her hands were trembling, but she refused to cry. Somewhere beyond the thick walls, faint music floated from the ballroom rehearsals, the sound of a world that did not know she existed. She searched every shelf, every drawer, until desperation pushed her to the floor, bits of thread and pins scattered like stars across the wood. Nothing. No spare needles. Her heart sank. She pressed her palms together, breathing deeply, forcing her mind to steady. "Think," she whispered. "There must be something." Footsteps passed the door. She froze, afraid Madame Delacour had returned. But it was only Claire, one of the laundresses, carrying linens for the morning. Seeing Amélie on her knees, Claire gasped, "What are you doing here so late?" "I broke my last needle," Amélie said. "The gown is unfinished." Claire placed the basket down and knelt beside her. "Wait here." She left and returned moments later, holding something small wrapped in cloth. "I found this in your mother's old chest. It's bent, but it might serve." Amélie unwrapped it slowly. The needle was old, dull in color, slightly curved, but still whole. She recognized it instantly. "My mother's," Claire nodded. "She said it never broke even when the fabric fought her hands." Amélie's throat tightened. "Thank you." Claire smiled faintly. "Finish it, Amélie." For her. When she was alone again, Amélie wiped her eyes and returned to the table. The bent needle slid through the silk with difficulty, but it worked. Every stitch hurt her fingers, but she did not stop. The golden vines spread across the bodice like sunlight over frost. Outside, the sky began to pale. Dawn was near. Exhaustion clawed at her, yet she refused to rest. Each movement felt slower, heavier, but her resolve only grew stronger. She had promised herself she would finish, and she would. At the first sound of morning bells, the door opened. Madame Delacour stepped in, her face pinched from lack of sleep. Her gaze fell upon the gown, then upon Amélie, still at work. "You're still here." "Yes, madame." Delacour came closer, eyes narrowing. "You truly mean to finish this madness?" "It will be done by evening." Delacour examined the gown, her expression unreadable. "You've ruined yourself for a jest. The prince will not remember this challenge by tonight." Amélie looked up at her. "Perhaps he will not, but others will." The older woman's lips thinned. "You speak as though you have pride." "I have work," Amélie replied. "That is enough." Madame Delacour turned sharply and left, but before she closed the door, Amélie saw something flicker in her eyes, a trace of fear. The hours rolled forward. The palace awoke, alive with preparations for the ball. Servants hurried through corridors carrying trays of crystal and silver. Carriages clattered in the courtyard, and still Amélie sewed, the bent needle glinting in the light. By midday her hands were shaking again. Her stomach ached from hunger, but there was no time to eat. She leaned closer to the table, her eyes burning. Around her the hum of life continued, voices, footsteps, laughter. But she heard none of it. Then the door opened once more, quietly this time. A shadow fell across her work. She looked up and froze. Prince Louis de Valcourt stood in the doorway. He said nothing at first, watching her from the threshold. The morning sun behind him threw his figure into sharp relief, his face half hidden in light. "You're still working," he said at last. "I gave my word, Your Highness." He walked inside, his boots silent on the floor. "I thought you would have given up by now." "So did I," she admitted. He approached the table and looked down at the gown. For a moment he seemed lost for words. "You've done all this since yesterday?" "Yes." He ran a gloved hand above the fabric, careful not to touch it. "This is no simple seamstress's work." Amélie lowered her eyes. "It is only fabric, Your Highness. Fabric does not move like this," he murmured. "It looks alive." Silence stretched between them. Then he said, "Why do you care so much to finish it?" "Because you challenged me." His mouth curved faintly. "And that is reason enough." "It was not the challenge," she said softly. "It was the laughter." For the first time, the prince's expression faltered. He turned away, as if her words had struck something inside him he did not wish to show. "Finish it then," he said quietly. "I shall see it tonight." When he left, Amélie's breath came easier, though her heart still beat fast. His voice had lost its arrogance, replaced by something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or respect. She dared not hope for more. By late afternoon, fatigue blurred her vision. Her fingers felt numb, her neck stiff. The gown was nearly complete. She lifted it, holding it against the light. The gold shimmered softly, catching the sun. One of the younger seamstresses entered, carrying a tray of bread and tea. "Madame Delacour sent this," she said. Amélie blinked in surprise. "She did?" The girl nodded. "She said even fools need to eat." Amélie smiled faintly. "Then tell her this fool is grateful." She ate quickly, her hands trembling slightly around the cup. The warmth revived her. As the sun began to sink, the atelier filled with orange light. Amélie added the final touches, the lace around the neckline, the small pearls along the sleeves. The gown now seemed to breathe with its own light. A group of servants passed the open door and stopped. "Look at that," one whispered. "It's finer than anything Madame Delacour ever made." "Be quiet," another hissed. "If she hears, she'll have your tongues." They hurried off, but their awe lingered in the air. When the last pearl was sewn, Amélie sat back, staring at the dress. It was finished. Every pain, every tear, every sleepless hour had led to this. The prince's mockery, the court's laughter, all of it now hung before her in silk and gold. She stood, too weak to feel triumph. For a long moment, she simply gazed at the gown, her mother's needle still warm in her hand. The door swung open suddenly. Madame Delacour stormed in, two assistants trailing behind her. "So it is done," she said, her eyes gleaming. "Yes, madame." Delacour circled the gown slowly, her expression hard to read. "It is Remarkable, she said at last. Too remarkable. Amélie frowned. What do you mean? You forget your place, girl. You were never meant to outshine the Duchess herself. Amélie stiffened. It was His Highness's order. His jest, Delacour snapped. And you turned it into a scandal waiting to happen. I did nothing wrong. You did everything wrong. Delacour's voice trembled with anger. Or was it fear? If he presents this dress to the Duchess, and she learns it was sewn by a laundress's child, do you think she will thank you? She will destroy you and perhaps me with you. I only did what was asked, Amélie said quietly. Delacour stared at her, then at the gown again. You will not show this to him. Do you hear? I forbid it. But he commanded. I will deal with His Highness myself, Delacour interrupted. You have caused enough trouble. She gestured to her assistants. Lock this door. The gown stays here. The two women hesitated, glancing at Amélie. Do it, Delacour barked. The heavy key turned in the lock. Delacour's voice softened, though it carried no kindness. Rest now, child. When this foolishness is forgotten, you will thank me. When they left, Amélie ran to the door. The lock held firm. She rattled it once, twice, then stepped back, her pulse racing. The windows were narrow, high above her head. There was no way out, at least none meant for noble guests. She closed her eyes, breathing hard. The laughter from the hall drifted up again, mocking her through the silence. She looked down at her gown, the masterpiece that no one would see. Then her gaze lifted to the far corner of the room, the small door half hidden behind shelves, leading to the servants' corridor. Few used it anymore. It was narrow, dusty, but not locked. Heart-pounding, she grabbed the gown, folded it carefully over her arm, and hurried toward the door. The passage smelled of stone and candle wax. Her footsteps echoed softly as she descended the hidden stairway. She emerged into the lower corridors of the palace just as the evening bells began to toll. Servants scurried past, carrying trays and bottles, too busy to notice her. The music from the ballroom grew louder, bright and distant. Holding the gown close, Amélie made her way toward the Hall of Mirrors. The corridors shimmered with light, chandeliers burned like suns. The scent of perfume and polished marble filled the air. When she reached the edge of the great hall, her breath caught. Nobles in silks and jewels swirled across the floor, laughter echoing under the domed ceiling. The prince stood near the dais, speaking to the Duchess, his expression composed but distracted. Amélie hesitated in the shadows, clutching the dress. She wanted to turn back, but it was too late. This was the moment she had sewn toward. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. The golden gown gleamed under the chandeliers. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Heads turned. The musicians faltered. The prince looked up. His conversation stopped mid-sentence. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her. "Your Highness," she said, her voice calm though her heart raced. "The gown you requested." He stepped closer, ignoring the whispers that rose like wind. "You finished it." "Yes, Your Highness." The Duchess turned sharply, her expression unreadable. "What is this?" The prince glanced at her, then back at Amélie. A promise kept. He reached out and touched the fabric, his fingers tracing the golden vines. "It's magnificent." The hall fell silent. Even the Duchess's ladies-in-waiting stared, their faces pale with envy. The gown seemed to glow beneath the light, alive with motion, the work of a heart that had poured itself into every thread. But the silence broke with a single voice, sharp and cold. From the far end of the room, Madame Delacour stepped forward, her face tight with fury. "That dress," she cried, "was not her work. She stole it." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned. The sound of Madame Delacour's accusation echoed beneath the mirrored ceiling. The music stopped abruptly. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Amélie stood frozen, the golden gown folded in her arms, her heart hammering so loudly she could barely hear her own thoughts. "She stole it!" Madame Delacour shouted again, advancing between the guests. "The design, the fabric, the very pattern. It was commissioned by the royal atelier. This girl had no right to touch it." The courtiers began to murmur, their whispers spreading like wildfire. The Duchess's eyes narrowed, sharp as the edge of a blade. "Is this true?" she demanded. Amélie found her voice. "No, Your Grace, I sewed every stitch myself. The prince asked me." "The prince?" Delacour interrupted. You dare to speak his name so familiarly? Lies, you took the gown to impress him, didn't you, to climb above your place? That's enough, came a voice from the dais. Prince Louis descended the steps slowly, his face pale but composed. You forget yourself, Madame Delacour. I forget nothing, Your Highness, Delacour said, bowing stiffly. This girl is deceiving you. She seeks your favor by stealing what belongs to your court. The crowd parted as he approached. His eyes met Amélie's, steady, searching. Did you make this gown? Yes, Your Highness, she said softly. Every stitch. You commanded it. He looked at the gown again, at the delicate gold vines glimmering under the chandeliers. Something in his face changed, doubt giving way to realization. I did command it, he said. Delacour's mouth fell open. Your Highness, she— Enough, he said sharply. I remember my own words. He turned to the Duchess. I made a jest yesterday morning, a cruel one. I challenged this woman to sew the gown before sunset. She accepted. A wave of astonished murmurs swept through the court. The Duchess's fan snapped shut. A jest? She repeated, her voice cool. And you humiliated your own tailor's workshop for it? Prince Louis's jaw tightened. It was thoughtless. Madame Delacour seized the moment. Then surely, Your Highness, you will see that allowing a servant to parade her false triumph would only worsen that mistake. The prince's gaze flicked toward her. False? Of course false, Delacour insisted. How could she have completed such a gown in a single day? It's impossible. Amélie took a trembling breath. It was not impossible. I began the moment Your Highness spoke. I worked until dawn. I broke my needle, but I finished it, with the one my mother left me. Delacour gave a harsh laugh. Sentiment cannot prove skill. Your Highness, the threads of deceit are easier to weave than gold. The prince's voice lowered. Enough, madame. But she refused to stop. You cannot let her stand here before all of France as if she were your equal. What will the court think? What will the Duchess— The Duchess lifted her hand, silencing her. Let her prove it. All eyes turned toward Amélie. Prove it, she echoed. The Duchess's expression was calm but calculating. If your hands created this, they can create another. Bring her fabric. A single hour will show the truth. Madame Delacour smiled thinly. Yes. Let her prove it. A servant hurried to fetch materials. The prince's face betrayed a flicker of unease, but he said nothing. They placed a small table near the dais, lit by dozens of candles. The Duchess gestured toward it. Begin. Amélie stepped forward, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. The courtiers pressed closer, eager for spectacle. Madame Delacour folded her arms, eyes gleaming. A maid handed Amélie a fresh needle and a spool of golden thread. She took them quietly, then glanced once at the prince. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze never left her. The room was utterly silent as she began. Her fingers trembled only for a moment before settling into rhythm. The thread slipped through the silk, smooth and sure. The familiar motion steadied her. The whisper of needle and cloth became her heartbeat. Delacour smirked. Watch closely. Her trick will show soon enough. Minutes passed. The design began to form, a single golden rose, petals curling with delicate precision. A murmur spread through the crowd. She's fast, someone whispered. Look at her hands, said another, like she's painting with thread. The Duchess leaned forward slightly, her cool composure faltering. Remarkable. Madame Delacour's face paled. It's mere imitation. Nothing more. Amélie finished the rose, tied the thread, and stepped back. The embroidery shimmered in the candlelight, alive with detail. She said nothing. The silence deepened. Finally, the prince spoke. No court tailor in France could match that. Madame Delacour's lips tightened. She must have stolen the pattern. There was no pattern, Amélie said quietly. I only follow what I see in my mind. The Duchess looked from Amélie to the prince, curiosity flickering in her eyes. She speaks truth, I think. The prince nodded slowly. It seems she does. Delacour's voice trembled. Then I am ruined, Your Highness. Ruined by a servant's ambition. Ruined, he repeated. No, madame. You are ruined by your own envy. The court gasped. Delacour's face turned crimson. She bowed stiffly, muttering something that sounded like "forgive me," then turned and fled the hall. For a moment, the silence was heavy, almost painful. Then the prince turned back to Amélie. "You have nothing more to prove." The Duchess regarded the gown one last time. "Keep it," she said coldly. "I no longer wish to wear something born of humiliation. Let it remind His Highness to choose his amusements with more care." She curtsied and swept away, her ladies following in a shimmer of silk. The court began to stir again, conversations rising in cautious tones. Some looked at Amélie with awe, others with envy. She stood in the midst of them all, her hands trembling from the weight of what had just passed. The prince turned to her. "Come with me." She followed him through the side corridor, away from the murmuring crowd, into a smaller gallery lined with tall windows. Outside, the night pressed softly against the glass. He stopped and faced her. "I owe you an apology." "There is no need, Your Highness." "There is," he said firmly. "I mocked you. I made you the target of laughter. And yet, you answered with courage and skill I did not deserve to witness." Amélie looked down, unsure what to say. "It was only my work." "No," he said. "It was your dignity." She met his eyes, and for a moment, neither spoke. There was something in his expression she had not seen before, a quietness that seemed almost human. He took a breath. "Tell me, what will you do now?" "I do not know," she said honestly. "I will likely be dismissed for the commotion." "You will not," he said. "I will see to that." She hesitated. "Why would you care?" "Because," he said slowly, "I cannot bear the thought that the only noble thing done under my roof tonight should go unrewarded." His words hung between them, heavier than gold. Amélie looked away. "Your Highness's world is not mine." "It could be," he said. She shook her head. "No, it was never meant for me." The prince took a step closer, lowering his voice. "The court is a prison of mirrors, Mademoiselle Durand. We spend our lives admiring our reflections until we forget what they mean. Tonight, you reminded me there is truth outside the glass." Amélie said nothing. The sincerity in his tone unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. A knock sounded behind them. A servant bowed quickly. "Your Highness, the Queen requests your presence. The incident has reached her attention." The prince sighed. "Of course it has." He turned back to Amélie. "Stay here. I will return." When he was gone, the gallery felt too vast, too silent. She walked to the nearest window and pressed her fingers against the cold glass. Below, the gardens stretched in perfect symmetry, the fountains glowing in the moonlight. She thought of her mother's words, of nights spent sewing by candlelight in a small attic room, dreaming of nothing more than a steady wage and peace. And now she stood in the palace, her name whispered by nobles she would never dine beside. The door opened softly behind her. It was not the prince. It was one of the Duchess's maids, a nervous girl with sharp eyes. "Mademoiselle Durand," she whispered, "you must be careful." "Careful?" "The Duchess is furious. She says the prince has humiliated her before the court. She blames you. She means to see you dismissed, perhaps worse." Amélie's heart tightened. "Why tell me this?" The girl glanced nervously down the corridor. "Because I once worked in the laundry, too. I know what it is to be trampled by silk shoes. Go, leave Versailles before morning." "I cannot," Amélie said. "I would have nowhere to go." "Anywhere is safer than here," the girl insisted. "If the Duchess's anger grows, even the prince may not protect you." Before Amélie could answer, footsteps echoed from the far end of the gallery. The maid vanished into the shadows. The prince returned, looking troubled. "The Queen has spoken," he said. "She wishes to see the gown." "Now?" "Yes, she wants to know the truth herself." Amélie nodded faintly. "Then I will go with you." They walked together through the corridors. The palace had quieted, but clusters of courtiers still whispered in corners, their curiosity far from satisfied. When they entered the Queen's chamber, the air was heavy with perfume and candle smoke. The Queen sat at her writing desk, pale and regal, her expression unreadable. The prince bowed. "Majesty, this is Amélie Durand, the seamstress in question." The Queen's eyes moved slowly over Amélie. "So this is the girl who sews faster than time itself," she said. "Show me." Amélie unfolded the gown. The gold shimmered under the candlelight, and for a moment the Queen said nothing. She rose from her chair, approached, and touched the fabric gently. Exquisite, she murmured. And you made this alone? Yes, Your Majesty. The Queen's gaze softened. Then France has gained an artist. You will remain at court under my protection. Amélie's breath caught. Your Majesty? No argument, the Queen said, smiling faintly. Genius must not be punished for exposing foolishness. As for the Duchess, her pride will recover. She turned to the Prince. You, however, might consider better amusements in the future. He bowed. I understand, Majesty. The Queen waved her hand dismissively. Go. The ball must continue. Let this night end in grace, not scandal. They left the chamber together, both silent until the corridor opened once more into the Hall of Mirrors. The crowd had thinned. The music resumed faintly in the distance. Amélie looked up at the mirrors surrounding them. For the first time, her reflection did not frighten her. The Prince stopped beside her. It seems you have conquered Versailles, she smiled faintly. I only wish to keep my promise. And now? He asked. Now I wish to rest. He laughed softly. Tomorrow, perhaps, you may rest. Tonight, you must face the court once more. They are waiting to see if the Prince's jest ends in shame or wonder. She hesitated. And which will it be, Your Highness? He looked at her, eyes glinting beneath the chandelier light. That depends on how you wish the story to end. Before she could answer, a loud murmur rose from the far end of the hall. The nobles were gathering again, whispering, pointing toward the grand staircase. The Queen's herald had returned, carrying the gown high above his head for all to see. By order of Her Majesty, he declared, this creation shall be presented to the court as a work of art, and its maker honored before all. Applause broke out, tentative at first, then growing louder. Amélie stood frozen, the Prince at her side. Her name echoed through the room. But amid the applause she saw Madame Delacour standing near the pillars, her face pale with fury. The older woman turned and disappeared into the shadows, her expression promising that the matter was far from over. As the crowd pressed closer, voices rising in awe and admiration, Amélie's triumph glowed like a fragile flame, brilliant, beautiful, and one breath away from being extinguished. The applause still echoed through the Hall of Mirrors when Amélie found herself standing beside the Prince again. Her heart beat fast, though the evening's tension had begun to dissolve. The nobles' laughter no longer cut like knives, their whispers no longer spoke of mockery, but of astonishment. Everywhere she looked, eyes followed her, not in scorn but in awe. The Prince leaned toward her and said quietly, You've turned my jest into glory. You've made me the fool and the hero at once. Amélie gave a small smile. Then perhaps we are both redeemed, Your Highness. He laughed softly, shaking his head. No, only you are redeemed. I am merely forgiven. Before she could answer, the Queen's herald called for attention. The music stopped once more. The Queen herself entered the hall, radiant and calm, wearing no jewels but her crown. Let this night remind us, she said, that greatness is not born of blood, but of hands that serve with devotion. Mademoiselle Amélie Durand, you are to be granted a title in the Royal Atelier. From this day forward, your work belongs to the House of France. The nobles bowed. Amélie stood frozen, unable to speak. The Queen's smile was faint, but sincere. You may continue your service here under my patronage. I trust you will accept? Yes, Your Majesty, Amélie murmured. The Queen nodded and turned to the Prince. And you, Louis, will learn that words, once spoken, carry weight even when meant in jest. I expect you to remember that. He bowed deeply. I will, Majesty. When the Queen departed, the atmosphere shifted again. The ball resumed. Music swelling, laughter returning. But the mockery that had once filled the palace was gone. Everywhere Amélie passed, people curtsied or offered cautious smiles. She felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the sudden change. Near the edge of the hall, she paused to catch her breath. Claire, the laundress who had once helped her, appeared beside her carrying a tray of wine. They're all talking about you, she whispered. They say the Queen herself called you an artist. Amélie smiled faintly. And you, what do you say? I say, Claire replied, that I will tell my sisters I once worked with the woman who made the court bow. Amélie touched her friend's arm gently. You have a kind heart. Do not let this place take it from you. Before Claire could answer, Madame Delacour's sharp voice cut through the crowd. Move aside. The older woman's face was pale, her eyes dark and tired. Amélie braced herself, expecting another attack, but Delacour only stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. "You have destroyed me," she said quietly. "I did not mean to. You didn't need to mean it. Talent is cruelty enough." Delacour's gaze softened unexpectedly. "You have what I never did. Purity of purpose. Guard it well." Then she turned and walked away, her figure swallowed by the glittering crowd. Amélie watched her go, feeling an ache she hadn't expected. She had wanted victory, not another's ruin. The prince joined her, holding 2 glasses of wine. "You're pale," he said. "Drink." "I don't think I could swallow." He smiled. "You must. It's tradition. When a triumph is witnessed, the victor drinks. I am no victor." "You are," he said simply. "And I am witness." She took the glass and sipped. The warmth spread through her, calming her trembling hands. Across the hall, the orchestra began a new waltz. The couples moved gracefully, silks swishing in soft rhythm. The prince glanced toward the floor, then back at her. "I gave my word once," he said. "If you finished the gown, I would take you to the ball." Her breath caught. "You were jesting." "Not now." He held out his hand. "Dance with me, Amélie Durand." The room went still as she hesitated. The courtiers' eyes turned to them again, curiosity burning behind their masks of politeness. Then she placed her hand in his. The orchestra swelled. They moved onto the floor, the crowd parting around them. His hand at her waist was firm but respectful. His eyes held none of the arrogance she once despised. "You lead well for a prince," she murmured. "I've never led anyone like you," he replied. They danced in silence for a while. Around them, the mirrors reflected countless images of their movement. Servant and prince, seamstress and heir, 2 figures who should never have shared the same step. When the waltz ended, applause filled the hall again. But this time, Amélie did not feel the sting of attention. She felt peace. The prince led her to a quieter corner, near a tall window overlooking the moonlit gardens. "I cannot undo my cruelty," he said softly, "but I can offer something better." She looked at him warily. "And what would that be?" "Respect," he said. "Perhaps friendship. Perhaps more, if your heart allows." She shook her head. "You are a prince. I am a servant." He smiled. "You are not a servant anymore. The Queen herself said so." "That changes nothing. It changes everything." He paused, then lowered his voice. "Do you not see? Tonight, you proved that worth is not born. It is made. You have shown me that even a prince can be poor in character beside a woman of true courage." Amélie felt her cheeks warm. "You speak like a poet, Your Highness." He laughed quietly. "No. I speak like a man trying to understand what humility feels like." Before she could reply, a page entered, bowing low. "Your Highness, Her Majesty requests your presence again." Louis sighed. "The night will not release me." He turned to Amélie. "Will you wait here?" "Yes." When he was gone, she walked toward the window. The gardens below glowed silver under the moonlight. She could see the fountain where her mother once carried laundry to dry in secret corners of the palace grounds. The memory struck her suddenly, sharp and sweet. Claire approached again. "They're saying the Queen will make you head of the royal workshop." Amélie blinked. "Head? Yes, it's already being whispered. The older seamstresses are furious." "That's too much," Amélie murmured. "It will only bring more resentment." Claire tilted her head. "Would you refuse it?" "I don't know." "You should take it. You earned it." Amélie smiled faintly. "Perhaps earning something and wanting it are not the same." From the far doors came the sound of hurried steps. The prince returned, looking relieved. "It's done," he said. "The Queen has approved your appointment. You'll lead the atelier." Amélie stared at him. "That cannot be true." "It is. The decree will be written by morning." She lowered her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me," he said. "Thank yourself. I merely stopped others from standing in your way." The orchestra changed tune again, a slower melody now, filled with warmth and promise. Louis looked toward the floor, then back at her. "Will you stay at Versailles?" "I have nowhere else." "Good," he said softly. "Then I'll see you often." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. The noise of the ball faded. The music seemed far away. For a brief moment the world narrowed to the quiet space between their breaths. She was the first to break it. "You should return to your guests, Your Highness. They are waiting. Let them wait," he said. But he stepped back reluctantly. "Tomorrow we will speak again. You'll have your workshop, and perhaps if you'll allow it, I'll come to see your work." "If I allow it," she said with a faint smile. He bowed slightly. "Until tomorrow, Mademoiselle Durand." He left her there, standing by the window with the moonlight pouring over her gown. For a long moment, she felt the strangeness of it all. The servant who had entered the palace through humility, now walking among nobles as their equal. When the crowd began to disperse, she slipped away from the hall and returned to the quiet corridors, where she had spent so many hours sewing in silence. The familiar scent of thread and fabric greeted her. Her hands brushed against the wooden table, where her mother's old needle still rested. She picked it up, tracing the metal curve gently. "You were right, Maman," she whispered. "Dignity never tears." A knock sounded at the door. The prince stood there, no longer in his ceremonial coat, but in a simple dark jacket. "I should have let you rest," he said, stepping inside. "But there was one thing I needed to say before the night ends." "What is it?" He hesitated. "When I first saw you, I thought only of amusement. I thought your silence was fear, but now I know it was strength. I owe you not only an apology, but gratitude. You've changed something in me I cannot explain. You do not owe me anything." He shook his head. "Perhaps not. Yet I cannot leave this night behind without asking, when you look at me now, do you still see the man who mocked you?" Amélie studied him for a long time. "I see a man who learned." His smile was faint, touched with humility. "Then I can sleep in peace." She stepped closer, her voice almost a whisper. "And I see something else." "What?" "That even a prince can be kind." He looked at her then, not as royalty, not as a master of others' fates, but as a man. "Amélie," he said quietly, "one day when this scandal fades and the court forgets, I would like to see you again, not as a subject, but as myself." Her heart raced. "You are speaking dangerously, Your Highness." "Perhaps," he said, smiling, "but I find I no longer care for caution." She lowered her gaze, unsure how to answer. He reached for her hand, but stopped halfway, letting it fall instead. "Forgive me," he murmured. "You deserve honesty, not confusion." "You've given both," she said softly. He laughed, a quiet, weary sound. "Then we are even." The clock struck midnight. The sound rolled through the corridors, marking the end of a night neither would forget. He bowed once more, his eyes never leaving hers. "Good night, Mademoiselle Durand. Good night, Your Highness." When he was gone, Amélie leaned against the table, her hand still warm from where his had almost touched it. The palace was silent now, the echoes of music fading into the vastness of its halls. She looked down at the golden gown folded beside her, its surface shimmering faintly in the candlelight. A servant's footsteps approached. It was Claire again, holding a sealed parchment. "This came from the Queen's chamber," she said breathlessly. Amélie took it and broke the seal. The decree was real, her name written in careful script, her appointment confirmed. She would lead the atelier. She read it twice, unable to believe it. Claire grinned. "You've done it, Amélie. You've won." Amélie smiled slowly. "No, Claire. We've all won. Every woman who's ever sewn for crumbs now has her share of this light." From outside came the faint sound of hooves and wheels as the carriages began to leave the palace grounds. The ball was ending, but something new was beginning. She looked once more at the dark corridor where the prince had vanished and whispered under her breath, "Tomorrow, then." Morning light crept through the tall windows of the atelier, painting soft gold over the tables and spools of thread. Amélie stood by the same workbench where she had once wept in silence. Now the room was hers. The royal decree lay open beside her, stamped with the Queen's seal. Beneath it, the golden gown rested folded with reverence. No longer a burden, but a beginning. The door opened. Claire stepped inside, grinning. "You haven't slept." Amélie smiled faintly. "It seems I no longer remember how." "Everyone's talking," Claire said, walking closer. "The Queen's decree was read aloud at breakfast. You're the head of the atelier now." "I heard." "Are you proud?" Amélie looked around the room. The light caught on her mother's old needle, still lying where she had left it. "Pride is too loud a word," she said. "But I am grateful." Claire laughed softly. You sound like a noblewoman already. I hope not. Before Claire could reply, a footman appeared at the door. Mademoiselle Durand, His Highness requests your presence in the South Gardens. Claire's eyes widened. The prince? At this hour? Amélie wiped her hands on her apron. Tell him I'll come. The footman bowed and left. Claire leaned close. He never calls for anyone this early. Amélie felt her pulse quicken. Then I shouldn't make him wait. The garden air was cool, scented faintly with lilacs and earth. The marble fountains gleamed under the morning sun. Amélie followed the gravel path until she saw him standing by the old stone archway, his coat unbuttoned, his hair slightly disordered as though he had walked without servants. Your Highness, she said softly. He turned, his expression lighting with quiet warmth. Amélie, you came. You summoned me, she said, smiling. True, he admitted, but I wasn't sure you would obey. You've grown far too important for that. I obey kindness, she said, and curiosity. Then let me satisfy both. He gestured toward a bench beneath a blossoming tree. They sat, the morning breeze stirring the petals around them. For a moment, neither spoke. He finally said, The court has been whispering all morning. They think I intend to propose a scandal. Do you? I intend to propose something, he said. Her breath caught. Your Highness. He shook his head. Not as a prince, not as a command, as a man asking a woman who changed him. She looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. You speak too kindly of me. I speak truth, he said. You forced me to see beyond mirrors and titles. Before you, I believed everything I wanted could be ordered, not earned. You showed me the opposite. Words, she whispered. Beautiful words. He smiled. Then allow me a deed. He reached into his coat and drew out a small box of polished wood. Inside lay a single ring, simple yet elegant, a gold band shaped like a thread winding in a circle. I had it made last night, he said. The goldsmith said the design was impossible. I told him to ask the woman who made the impossible her craft. Amélie stared at it, speechless. He continued, his voice low. I do not offer you a title or jewels or a crown, only myself. Will you let me share the life you've built, however humble or grand it becomes? She looked at him, tears shining in her eyes. You forget who I am. I remember exactly who you are, he said. That's why I ask. She tried to speak, but her voice faltered. Louis, he smiled softly. You've never said my name before. Should I not? I hope you never stop. Her laughter trembled with disbelief. The Queen will never allow this. The Queen has already approved, he said. She told me last night that France could use a prince who marries a heart rather than a title. Amelie's hand flew to her lips. She said that? She said more. She said your strength might one day save me from myself. He took her hand gently, his thumb brushing the seam of her palm. She's right. You already have. Tears slipped down her cheeks. You cannot mean this. I mean every word. But what of the court? They will mock you. They've mocked me before, he said. It will not kill me, but losing you might. The sound of the fountain filled the quiet. The morning light broke through the leaves, scattering gold across his face. Amélie's heart ached with the weight of it all, every insult, every stitch, every night of silence leading to this single moment. I don't know how to be a princess, she whispered. Then don't, he said. Be Amélie. That's all I want. She looked at the ring again. The golden thread gleamed softly, catching the light like the gown she had sewn. Slowly, she extended her hand. Then teach me how to live without fear. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his touch trembling slightly. Only if you teach me how to live with purpose. She smiled through her tears. We have a bargain then, he exhaled, a sound half relief, half wonder. A royal bargain, Amélie laughed. No, Louis, a human one. He leaned closer, his hand still holding hers. May I? She nodded once. His lips brushed hers gently, the kiss soft and hesitant, as though afraid the moment might vanish. When they parted, she was trembling, not from fear, but from the quiet certainty that her life had changed forever. He stood, drawing her up with him. We'll tell the Queen together. She will expect a ceremony. She'll have it, he said, but first she'll have a story, and perhaps a smile. They walked side by side along the garden path, the palace rising before them like a dream made of stone and light. Servants paused to stare, but the prince's gaze never wavered from hers. When they entered the marble corridor, the queen was already waiting at the end, flanked by her attendants. "So it's true," she said, her eyes twinkling with quiet amusement. "You bring me a seamstress instead of a duchess." "Not a seamstress," Louis said. "The woman who made Versailles remember what beauty means." The queen smiled faintly. "Then I shall not stand in the way. France will gossip, but let them. It will remind them that grace is not measured by birth." Amélie curtsied deeply. "Your Majesty, I will serve faithfully. But if I am to stand beside him, let it be as myself, not as someone remade to fit this court." The queen nodded approvingly. "Then France will have a queen of honesty one day. I pray it deserves you both." When the ceremony took place a month later, Versailles overflowed with flowers instead of jewels. The nobles attended, curious and uneasy, yet unable to deny the wonder of it all. Amélie wore no crown, only a gown of silver thread she had sewn herself, light as mist, graceful as dawn. The prince waited for her at the altar beneath a canopy of white lilies. As she walked toward him, every step echoed softly through the great hall. He met her halfway, taking her hand before she could bow. "No," he whispered. "Today no one bows." The officiant's words faded into the music of their hearts. When he lifted her veil, the hall fell utterly silent. "Amélie Durand," he said, his voice steady. "You once told me that every stitch is a promise. Let this be mine." "And mine," she answered. They exchanged rings, two circles of gold shaped like threads woven together. The queen's eyes glistened as the crowd, once skeptical, rose in applause. That evening, when the guests departed and the lights dimmed, Louis led her back to the Hall of Mirrors. The same place where laughter had once broken her spirit now shimmered with quiet peace. He turned to her. "Do you remember this hall? How could I forget?" "Then look at it again." She did. And for the first time, she saw not her humiliation, but her triumph reflected in every mirror. The girl who had been mocked stood now as a woman loved and honored. Louis took her hands. "You taught me that power is not born of command but of creation. You gave me a new kingdom, one of truth. And you," she said softly, "gave me back my voice." They stood together beneath the chandeliers, their reflections infinite. Around them, the mirrors caught their laughter and scattered it through the hall like starlight. The queen's musicians returned briefly to play the final waltz of the night. No courtiers remained, only the two of them dancing slowly, their movements light as breath. Louis murmured, "Do you regret any of it?" "Only that I once believed I was small," she said. "And now I know that even a single thread can change a destiny." He smiled and pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "Then you've changed mine forever." They danced until the last candle burned low, their shadows merging with the gold of the floor. Outside, dawn crept over Versailles again, gentle and new. In the quiet that followed, he whispered, "Do you know what the courtiers call you now?" She shook her head. "The golden seamstress, the woman who sewed her own fate." She laughed softly. "Then let them call me what they will. I have everything I ever needed." He kissed her once more, deeper this time, certain and true. When they parted, his voice was a whisper, "And I have you." The first light of morning broke through the tall windows, flooding the hall in gold. The mirrors caught it, multiplying it until the whole palace seemed to glow. And there, beneath that endless light, the girl who once stitched alone in silence found herself held in the arms of the man who had once laughed, and now would never let her go. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.